So who remembers Yugoslavia? Seems like a lot of people don't. Maybe they're too young. Seems like a lot of people have forgotten. Seems like the pro-Russia side is now reminding us of the hypocrisy of NATO, and well, they're correct, right? For something like 3 months almost, they bombed the shit out of Yugoslavia, right? NATO did. Under the pretext of there being a genocide, and it's disputed whether or not there was, but there was definitely strife on the ground, right? Muslims and Christians were fighting and killing each other. So under the pretext of, helping those people there, they bombed the fuck out of Yugoslavia, right? They bombed the car factory, their industry. They bombed the fuck out of civilians, infrastructure. They essentially destroyed the whole country, also using, I don't know if they're technically nuclear weapons, depleted uranium shells, right? And now they're pretending to somehow be good guys, even though knowing that if they go in and do what they did, right, instead of sending troops on the ground and looking to, peacekeep, not that that would have been the right solution necessarily, but it would have been better than just bombing the fuck out of them, right, destroying their infrastructure and everything, pissing everybody off. Making it harder for people to feed themselves, encouraging lawlessness, so on and so forth, just destabilizing the region even more, right? They knew this was going to happen because it was well known that that's when you do this sort of thing, that's what follows, right? And indeed, that is what happened. However bad Yugoslavia may have been because of corruption and communism and whatever have you before, after NATO bombed the fuck out of them, things got much, much worse, right? Especially the genocide that they were allegedly there to stop. So yeah, it's quite hypocritical, obviously, of NATO to now act like a peacekeeping force when indeed they're just the military wing of the Western Roman Empire, right? So the people that are pro-Putin bringing this up, they have a point. But what they don't seem to recognize, as it tends to be the case with people pointing the finger, is their own fucking hypocrisy, right? If you're comparing these two situations, then indeed, what are you doing, right? Well, NATO did it, so two wrongs make a right now. Is that what we're saying here, right? Yes, the West is they're hypocrites. So are you, because you're choosing a side in a war of aggression and literally looking to justify it by saying, look, NATO did it, right? However, implicitly or whatever, you're the hypocrite too, right? But this is the problem with not speaking the truth, right? Not having an objective morality, right? Thou shalt not kill. That's the problem. You always end up a fucking hypocrite. Because if you assume that morality is subjective, relative, this is what you end up with. So, very much like what NATO did in Yugoslavia, right? Putin is murdering Slavs, right? Slavic people. The Yugoslavs were, a lot of them were Serbs, right? Or Servs with the V, right? That's an antiquated spelling, I guess, depending on who you ask, which really just means serfs, right? Slavs are the slaves. So whether it's the serfs or the Western slaves or the Slavs or the Eastern slaves, right? They're both getting fucked by the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, both of whom, as I've been talking about forever on this channel, have been created by Germanic people, Semites. Okay? So, I'm not a geopolitical analyst or whatever. I'm sure there was a multitude of causes, reasons why NATO went in there, probably to exercise their power and bring, destroy the mini USSR, which was Yugoslavia, basically, right? Balkanize and bring those. Well, look at what happened, right? Bring them under the fold into the EU and NATO, right? That was probably the goal, right? But what's Putin doing? The same fucking thing, right? Looking to destabilize, destroy, fracture Ukraine, right? And bring at least some of it under his control, right? If not all of it. He's talking about using nukes, and that doesn't necessarily mean huge booms and bangs. It could be a variety of smaller nuclear weapons, which, much like the depleted uranium shells, or chemical weapons, right? There's rumors of that being used too by the Russians, will make the region less habitable, which is exactly what destroying infrastructure does, right? It destroys. Russia is looking to destroy that country's ability to, well, feed their people, support them. They're destroying residential areas, cities, right? They're bombing the fuck out of tenements and everything, infrastructure, right? They're they're destroying Ukraine, making it less habitable, right? Toxic, which is kind of what, amongst other things, what NATO did in Serbia, right? And you had a huge exodus of those people to all over the damn world, which allowed for foreign powers to step in, and you fracture it, you depopulate to a certain degree, you make life unbearable, and then you swoop in with pro-Western shills or just Germanics, period, right? You take over the country from within, or the various smaller countries, which is easier to do because they're smaller, and you bring them into the fold while at the same time pushing Western reforms, like, for example, the Western style medical industrial complex, which again harkens back perhaps to the depleted uranium and increasing rates of cancer, right? So you create this more of this modern disease, and you at the same time provide a quote unquote solution for it, right? Implementing your own systems in many ways, or however you see fit, which is, well, very much what Putin is doing, right? Destroying infrastructure, making that whole place inhabitable, toxic, perhaps, right? Maybe that's coming next. He's threatening to do that, using phosphorus, using all these, like, if you are to believe the reports, right? We don't know. But whereas before it really seemed like they were careful about not hurting too many civilians, now they're just fucking them all up, using, what's considered illegal weapons, and just making the whole place inhabitable and toxic, and creating a mass exodus of Ukrainians into other parts of the world, right? Looking to destabilize those other neighboring countries and beyond, while weakening Ukraine so that they can take over it, right? Or at the very least weaken it to a point where it's just going to be useless to anybody, right? If we can't have it, nobody can. That sort of thing. So, yeah, what Putin is doing, yeah, the NATO are hypocrites, right? But if you're going to point out that NATO, people who now support NATO, right, seem to have been okay with what NATO did in Serbia or Yugoslavia, right? Like, yeah, of course they're hypocrites. But that at the same time implicates you, because you're a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite too. If you weren't okay with what NATO did in Serbia, how are you okay with what Russia is doing in Ukraine? How? It's not exactly the same, but more or less the same, right? So this is just what happens, right? When you reject objective truth, objective morality, and despite the fact that you may be claiming that morality does exist, you don't really seem to think it does. I don't have much else to say, man, but these two conflicts, in my view, are very similar. And the reason why the model is more or less the same is because at the end of the day, it's the same ideology, slightly different regional flavor, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, it's these Semitic, Germanic, right? Freemasonic, Satanistic ideologies, two branches of the same ideology, right? Exterminating amongst, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of different things at play here, but the thing that seems to be a recurring theme when it comes to these world wars, right? Exterminating the Slav, right? Or that other civilization. I mean, what else am I supposed to think, right? I mean, you call them serfs, you call them slaves, and that's exactly how you treat them, right? I thought so. Thanks for watching.